Bacteria are found everywhere on Earth. A milliliter of water can contain up to 1 million bacteria. A gram of salt, more than 40 million. The world's bacteria, taken together, weigh more than all the plants and animals combined. Long before humans existed, there were bacteria. They are essential for life on this planet. All living beings contain bacteria, inside and outside. The human body contains about 100 trillion bacterial cells. Many plants and animals have developed a symbiotic relationship with these organisms. Bacteria have played and continue to play an important role in evolution. Scientists have explored the deep sea bed to try to determine how bacteria can survive in such inhospitable places. These regions can be compared to Earth at the beginning of evolution. The deep sea floor at depths of 2,000 to 6,000 metres includes flat, smooth regions called abyssal plains. These plains cover more than half of the Earth's surface, and they are teeming with microorganisms. In the 1970s, scientists discovered the existence of hydrothermal vents, or black smokers, on the floor of the southern Pacific Ocean. Near the vents, they also found chemosynthetic bacteria and single-celled microbes, which provide food for organisms, including tube worms, clams and shrimp. But how can any kind of life survive in such an inhospitable environment? To find out more, scientists from the French Marine Research Institute, Ifremer, travelled to the Azores Islands in the Atlantic. There are several hydrothermal fields on the ocean floor here, which has a number of designated marine protected areas. On board the ship are 32 scientists and a remote-operated vehicle, Victor 6000. Researchers use the ROV to explore deep-sea areas and collect samples to depths of up to 6 kilometres. Victor begins its descent into a world of complete darkness. 2,300 metres below the surface, it heads for a field of hydrothermal vents known as Rainbow. These vents are created when seawater seeps into fissures in the Earth's crust, comes into contact with molten or semi-molten material called magma, and then shoots back up. When the material cools, it creates these chimney-like structures. The water in the vents contains dissolved minerals from the Earth's crust and can reach temperatures of more than 350 degrees Celsius. But a surprising number of organisms actually thrive in this environment. These include a species of shrimp called Rimicaris exulata. The scientists will be trying to recover some of them. Cylindrical structures known as chimneys often form around the vents. They're composed of minerals that were dissolved in the seawater when it mixed with the magma and then came back to the surface. The scientists on board the ship would like to get about 100 deep-sea shrimp for their research. The underwater vehicle will simply hoover them up. But as the shrimp are brought up from the depths of the ocean, they're subjected to a dramatic change in hydrostatic pressure. It was 230 kilograms per square centimetre where they were. At sea level, the pressure will be just a fraction of that, at just 1 kilogram per square centimetre. Marine biologist Bruce Shillito has been studying how this rapid change in pressure affects deep-sea organisms.
We ourselves are organisms that contain gas. If we are compressed to 300 bars, our thoracic cage is immediately squashed, which of course means instant death.
But the shrimp have no such gases, so they can survive up here, at least for a few days. Now the scientists start dissecting the shrimp, and they make a remarkable discovery. The intestines contain almost no digested food, just a few minerals. Their digestive tract doesn't seem to have much work to do, so how do the shrimp nourish themselves? Microbiologist Marie-Anne Cambon-Bonavita was surprised to find that the shrimps have disproportionately large heads.
The head takes up half the creature's body. That's very big. Normally, it's not even a third. When they're very young, they look like ordinary shrimps. And at a certain point in their development, they metamorphose, a bit like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. The head becomes so enormous, and the shell too, that the shrimp can't raise anymore and can't feed.
The scientists find that the shrimp's head contains an enormous chamber that holds the gills, which they use to breathe. The scientists also discover that the chamber is filled with billions of bacteria. Analysis showed that these shrimp belong to the same species. The researchers suspect that there's a connection between the bacteria and how the shrimps feed themselves, a sort of symbiotic relationship. To find out more, they'll have to study the shrimp that have not been subjected to pressure changes. They plan to use special equipment to retrieve them from the seafloor. The scientists now plan to study the role that bacteria play in the shrimp's development. They set off for another hydrothermal field near the Azores. It's called Lucky Strike and was discovered in 1992 at a depth of 1,700 metres. These carpets of whitish substance close to the thermal vents are actually huge colonies of bacteria. The water pressure here is lower than at the Rainbow site. That's why there are no chimneys near the vents, just small mounds of material.
The first thing you notice are these big layers of microbes, like big yellowish white carpets that cover the sediments of the seabed and the ends of the chimneys. And the extraordinary thing is that they're actually long filaments that float in the current.
These bacterial carpets grow particularly close to the places where superheated fluid is ejected from the sea floor. Scientists have measured temperatures here of more than 350 degrees Celsius. The hot fluids mix with the surrounding water, which is quite cold, about 3 degrees. The average water temperature in these areas warms to about 30 degrees Celsius, and that's a temperature at which bacteria can survive and grow. The water from the vents is very acidic and contains high concentrations of hydrogen, transition metals and rare earth elements. This is a harsh environment by any standard, but the bacteria seem to thrive here. Some of them even use toxic substances as sources of nourishment. The bacteria have adapted remarkably well to these thermal fields, and they've been doing it for billions of years. But some other organisms are also able to exist in these parts of the seabed. José Salazar is a researcher who specializes in the study of deep-sea ecosystems. Salazar wants to find out how and why bacteria manage to settle near thermal vents. She's prepared various bacteria habitats made from materials including slate, wood and bone. These will be placed near some thermal vents and brought back to the ship a few days later. In just a few days, bacteria from the surrounding area migrated to all of these new habitats. The bacteria in turn attract other organisms, called grazers.
The first animals fed directly on the bacteria, just like cows at pasture. They came to graze the fields of bacteria.
For millions of years, the bacteria here have served as a food source for more advanced organisms, which eventually settled near the hydrothermal vents.
There are little gastropods, little sea snails. There are also little amphipods, little crustaceans that graze on the bacteria.
Other species, like deep-sea mussels, adapted so well that they formed huge colonies. The researchers want to find out how they did it. They suspect the mussels formed some sort of symbiotic relationship with the bacteria. While the Rimicaris species of shrimp cannot survive at depths of more than 2,000 metres, these mussels can be found anywhere that hydrothermal vents are present, regardless of depth. At the Lucky Strike site, researchers bring up some mussels from a depth of less than 2,000 metres. The mussels apparently have few problems with decompression. Sébastien Duperron, seen here on the left, is a researcher who specialises in analysing the symbiotic relationship between bacteria and marine animals, specifically mussels. He opens a shell and is amazed at the size of its gills.
In this mussel, we found bacteria in the gills, and in great abundance, too.
But no bacteria are found on the outside of the gills. In these mussels, the bacteria actually live in the cells of the gills. That's a very unusual phenomenon. Each gill consists of thousands of small threads. On their surface are cells that specialise in the production of bacteria. You can see this clearly with a fluorescent microscope. The cell nucleus is blue, while the red and green dots are bacteria. The bacteria are able to penetrate the cell's immune system so that they actually colonise their host. But the mussels allow the bacteria to grow only in certain types of cells. The mussels also serve as a source of nourishment for the bacteria.
Mussels are in fact like filters. They circulate water through their gills. There's oxygen in this water as well as sulfurs, a bit of methane and a bit of dissolved carbon. So everything the bacteria need is there. And since the water is circulating, their environment is constantly being refreshed.
Over millions of years, these bacteria and mussels have developed a symbiotic relationship, a long-term and mutually beneficial biological interaction. The scientists want to find out more about this process, so they conduct an experiment. They move some mussels further away from the hydrothermal vents.
When we take them out of their natural habitat, the bacteria get no more sulfurs, no more methane, so they have nothing to live on.
The bacteria in the mussels that have been moved stop multiplying and eventually disappear completely. And the mussels survive without their bacteria for only 2 or 3 days. How do the scientists explain this mutual biological dependency?
The gills are like their larder, where they grow their bacteria.
Scientists have also determined that some of the bacteria are able to convert various materials in the mussel system into useful compounds.
We also think the bacteria are capable of releasing compounds. For example, as a bacteria grows up, it will release sugars around it within the cell of the animal.
The mussels can use these compounds as a source of food. The sugar reaches the mussel's cells via the bloodstream. This symbiotic relationship between mussels and bacteria helps both organisms to thrive in a hostile environment. The scientists have discovered an unusual phenomenon that underlines the importance of bacteria in the process of plant and animal evolution. Several billion years ago, the symbiotic fusion of 2 bacteria likely produced the first cell that had a nucleus, in a process similar to the symbiosis of bacteria and mussels. Later, these cells use bacteria to absorb and convert oxygen. Much later, this process contributed to the development of complex organisms, including mammals. Scientists believe that approximately 3 billion years ago, cells began converting light into chemical energy, a process known as photosynthesis. This led to the development of algae and later plants. So bacteria played a major role in the development of systems that enabled plant and animal life on Earth, breathing and photosynthesis. The mussel colonies on the seabed served as a source of food for other species. These include various kinds of predators and scavengers. They're similar to relatives that live in parts of the ocean that aren't as deep, but they've adapted so well to these conditions that they've evolved into separate species. Like Microcharis indica, a variety of shrimp, or Segonzacia mesatlantica, a species of crab. These creatures feed on the remains of organisms near the thermal vents. Chassion crabs also visit the mussel colonies from time to feed, but they don't stay long because the conditions are too dangerous for them. But for those scavenger species that can survive in this tough environment, there's plenty of food. Many of these crabs are covered in what looks like fine white hair, again, bacteria colonies. Marie-Anne Cambon-Bonavita says the crabs and bacteria have likewise developed a symbiotic relationship.
Generally, if a bacteria can lodge itself on an animal, that means it's been accepted and will benefit the animal. When the bacteria draw on heavy metals or elements like sulfurs, they transform them in order to grow, and so what they put back into the environment is less toxic than what they took in. That's what we refer to as detoxification.
The bacteria that attach themselves to the crabs can still access the nutrients that pour out of the hydrothermal vents, even though the crabs keep a safe distance away because of the excessive heat. The scientists have used a special high-pressure device to bring up some Rimicara shrimp from the ocean floor. Now they're going to transfer the shrimp to a special tank for observation.
Yeah. Là, je l'ai touché, hein.
The mission is headed by marine biologist Bruce Shalito. The shrimp in the tank will not suffer from the effects of decompression because the water pressure there is the same as it was on the seabed.
C'est chez vous, là? C'est bon. Ok, alors attends, je ferme. Oh, super, hein, dis donc, quand je me rappelle avec Gérard, les albinés là, on cognait à trois dessus sur le châssis.
The shrimp will likely survive here for up to 4 days.
In the aquarium, we can control the temperature, we can control the flow and pressure, and that allows us to carry out a lot of interesting experiments.
Marine biologist Magali Spiden says that those experiments led to some surprising discoveries about the symbiotic relationship between these shrimps and bacteria.
We'd always thought that the shrimps grazed on the inside of their gill cavity, that it was like a growing chamber and that they scratched at the bacteria there to eat them. But then we found out that the covering of bacteria was never actually scratched or damaged.
The scientists discovered that the bacteria produce organic molecules that provide nourishment for the shrimp.
The bacteria produce organic molecules that are diffused by passing through the skin of the animal.
Specifically, the molecules pass directly from the gills into the shrimp's bloodstream. This species of shrimp have unusually large heads containing billions of bacteria. The scientists have speculated that this is where the Rimicara shrimp's digestive tract may be located.
Human intestinal bacteria help us to digest. We have our gastric juices, of course, but they can't digest everything we eat. We think it's more or less the same thing for the Rimicaras. Basically, it's a shrimp that has its intestines in its head.
But the shrimp have a much closer symbiotic relationship with bacteria than humans do. The bacteria provide the shrimp with nourishment directly.
It's magic, really. Very well organized, anyway.
The advantages that bacteria can offer the shrimp are clear. But what benefits do the shrimp provide for the bacteria?
The shrimp provides the bacteria with a closed cavity where nothing else can get at them to eat them.
The shrimp also provide the bacteria with access to minerals and other vital substances that are contained in the water around the hydrothermal vents.
The shrimp's going back and forth into the heat, but not for too long. Like, oh, ouch, that's enough, better cool off a bit. But the bacteria get their hydrothermal fluids that enable them to multiply and prosper, and to provide the shrimp with its organic matter.
Sometimes you come across shrimps whose shells are burnt and have bits of them damaged. And this is certainly because they've got too close to the fluids and have been burnt by them.
Scientists have made a lot of progress in understanding this process of symbiosis. But they're still trying to find out how and when deep-sea mussels and shrimp actually start absorbing the bacteria. The experiments that these researchers have been carrying out have provided them with new insights about how the shrimp and mussels are able to survive in such a harsh environment. But a lot of questions remain.
This is definitely a very mysterious creature, and we don't know its life cycle. They carry a few eggs under their abdomen until they have a young larva that can swim, and we find bacteria on the outside of the eggs.
This is in contrast to human fetuses, for example, which develop in the sterile environment of the mother's womb. Bacteria are fascinating organisms. They can adapt to local conditions almost anywhere on Earth. The ancestors of modern bacteria were the first forms of life on this planet. Over time, they learned to develop symbiotic relationships with other organisms. In this way, they were a driving force behind the evolution of life. The examples of symbiosis that we've seen on the deep sea bed show that this process plays a key role in the preservation and development of life.